Coming up on Colonial Crossfire. President Obama's final State of the Union address. The race for the White House. And renewed tensions with North Korea. Joining us on the left, Eric Wolfert. On the right, Sean Kumnick. And I'm your moderator, Andrew Desiderio. This is Colonial Crossfire. President Obama gave his final State of the Union address this week, but it wasn't filled with lofty proposals and platitudes. Instead, the president wanted to look toward the future, beyond his exit from the Oval Office. So, is Obama a lame duck? Or will he accomplish some of his remaining legislative goals during his final year in office? Welcome to Colonial Crossfire. I'm Andrew Desiderio. Obama put the spotlight on what he's been able to accomplish during his 7 years in office. Meanwhile, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley gave the GOP rebuttal, and as expected, both were widely panned. Did Obama attempt to carve out his legacy? Did Haley cement herself as a top VP choice for the eventual Republican nominee? And did they both take shots at the GOP frontrunner? Here to analyze that and more, our student panel. On the left, Eric Wolfert, a senior from Scarsdale, New York, majoring in political science and minoring in criminal justice. Eric is the Emerging Energy Fellow for Energy and the Environment for the Roosevelt Institute, and previously served as the campaign director for the GW College Democrats. On the right, Sean Kumnick, a senior from South Windsor, Connecticut, majoring in economics and political science. Sean is an at-large senator in the GW Student Association and has worked on numerous state and federal campaigns. Thanks to both of you for joining us. While it may not have been shorter than past addresses, President Obama deviated from the typical rhetoric we hear each January. Instead of laying out legislative priorities, many of which never come to fruition, the president tried to cement his legacy. The Iran nuclear deal, the global climate change agreement, and new relations with Cuba all received mentions. Obama called on Congress to formally lift the Cuba embargo, authorize the use of military force to fight ISIS, and close the prison at Guantanamo Bay. Before the speech, White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough was asked about that campaign promise which Obama first made back in 2008.
The president has said from the beginning of this administration that we will close Gitmo because it's bad for our national security and because it's too costly. $4 million per year per detainee in that facility. That's a travesty. We ought to make sure that we're in a position to close that facility because it strengthens us when we close it. That's what the president will do. He feels an obligation to his successor to close that, and that's why we're going to do it.
But when pressed further on whether the president would move to close the facility without congressional approval, McDonough would not get specific. So Eric, first off, what did you make of the president's speech, and do you believe that President Obama has the authority to close Gitmo without first seeking approval from Congress?
Well, I thought the president's speech was an exercise in maintaining optimism about the year ahead while also being profoundly realistic. He understands that in the last year of his administration, a divided Congress, with Election Day growing closer every day, the likelihood of any grand bargain happening between the parties, between the houses of Congress, is likely not going to happen. That being said, he still laid out an agenda for himself, for his party, that will likely be the focus of great debate over the coming months. On the topic of Guantanamo, does he have the authority, and will he exercise that authority? I think are two very different questions. I think yes, he does. He does have that authority. At the same time, with the very limited political capital that he has left in his final year, I don't believe that he will expend it on closing it without congressional approval. I think he's got enough fights to pick with Congress over his use of executive action. I think his November 2014 executive action on immigration will continue to rile debate on Capitol Hill, and I don't think this is a bone he wants to pick.
Sean, as you heard Mr. McDonough say, top national security officials have said it actually hurts our national security keeping this facility open. Why should Gitmo stay open if it does?
It's one of those things where, like Eric was saying, I don't think it really matters too much whether or not it stays open, but I don't think we're going to see a change in the future. if it were to stay open, I think the reason people are so scared of Guantanamo Bay closing is where else in the world can you bring detainees that is still relatively close to the U.S., but also far enough away where you don't have terrorists stored somewhere, whether it be Colorado, New York, wherever else. I think most Americans are scared of having terrorists that are detained here on the U.S. mainland, and I think Guantanamo Bay kind of provides a little bit of a sense of safety and security for the average American. In my personal opinion, I don't think it's necessary to have it open. I do think we need some type of detention facility. Whether or not it's Guantanamo, I don't know.
I want to move on to another aspect of the speech. The president briefly mentioned gun violence, but did not touch on his specific executive orders that he made a couple weeks ago, which of course expanded background checks and provided more money for ATF agents and other federal agents. Sean, what did you make of those executive orders?
I think you have just the president going further when it comes to executive overreach. I come from Connecticut, and obviously after Sandy Hook, the state responded with almost draconian gun measures. I'm personally a person that believes in stricter laws when it comes to background checks, but I also don't believe in taking away a person's right to defend themselves. I personally am not a gun owner, but I know many people that are, and I also have seen how strict gun regulations have affected our state, how they've bled into every single aspect of living in Connecticut. We had a primary contest for governor last year where gun rights were the sole issue of the primary contest. And someone who was a very qualified candidate for governor was defeated because he voted for SB 1060, which is the gun legislation in Connecticut that was passed a couple of years ago. So I personally think that the president should do less when it comes to executive overreach and really try and have the states come up with a solution to this problem.
Eric, Sean brings up a good point about states' rights and how some gun laws might be different in other states or better for other states that are maybe more rural, more suburban, or more urban. Do you think that a one-size-fits-all plan would actually work?
When it comes to background checks, absolutely. I don't believe I don't believe in taking away the right of an individual to own a law-abiding citizen to own a gun either, but I don't believe that requiring every single applicant for a gun to undergo a simple background check does that. In most of these states, it can be done within an hour or two. And actually, most federally licensed gun dealers support it because they're losing business to the gun shows and simply people selling out of the backs of their trucks.
Moving on to Nikki Haley's rebuttal to President Obama's State of the Union address. Eric, I'm sure you saw DNC Chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz had said that the Republicans only picked Governor Haley because of her gender and her ethnicity, saying that the GOP has a diversity problem that they needed to address. Do you agree with her comments? Many called it sexist.
I don't agree with the comments per se. That being said, I do think the GOP has a diversity problem. I think if you simply look at the 2012 election results and you will see that the Republican Party between the last few elections, if you just compare, say, George W. Bush in 2000 versus Mitt Romney in 2012, you see the party is drastically losing ground among Hispanics, among Asian Americans, among Muslim Americans, and I don't think it's hard to see why. If you look at the nativist rhetoric surrounding so much of the primary campaign, even this year, we see Donald Trump, we see Ted Cruz, we even see the establishment favorite Jeb Bush, who says we shouldn't allow in Muslim refugees, and you can tell who's Christian and who's Muslim by what their last name sounds like. I don't think it's hard to see why the GOP is having trouble attracting non-white Americans.
Sean, what did you think of Governor Haley's speech, and do you think she is a viable choice for vice president?
I think she is. I think she'd bring a more moderate tone to the table, but not one that's wishy-washy in a sense. I think I would agree with Eric. We do have a diversity problem on the presidential level. I think you're seeing some of the worst of the party when it comes to their views on immigration and their views on other issues of similar importance. And I think Governor Haley would be a good choice with what she's done to break down barriers and also what she's done reform-wise when it comes to how she's helped out South Carolina.
I think you both brought this up on immigration and the idea of banning Muslim refugees. Very notable was the fact that we had not only President Obama, but Nikki Haley, in a veiled reference to Donald Trump, the GOP frontrunner, in both of their speeches, criticized the type of rhetoric we're seeing on the GOP side. Let's take a listen to that.
When politicians insult Muslims, whether abroad or our fellow citizens, when a mosque is vandalized or a kid is called names, that doesn't make us safer. That's not telling it like it is. It's just wrong.
Today, we live in a time of threats like few others in recent memory. During anxious times, it can be tempting to follow the siren call of the angriest voices. We must resist that temptation. No one who is willing to work hard, abide by our laws, and love our traditions should ever feel unwelcome in this country.
So Eric, what does it say about the state of our politics right now and the state of the election, such that the president and the person giving the GOP rebuttal had to both address Donald Trump?
Well, I think it shows that the Republican establishment sees Donald Trump as just as much of a threat as Democrats and liberals do. At the same time, I think it's also worth noting that while Governor Haley's rhetoric is important, and I commend her for that, I think it's also important to note that while she served in the South Carolina State Senate and as governor, she voted, even co-sponsored a number of anti-immigrant bills. So while her rhetoric may be softer than the likes of Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, I don't think it's necessarily evidence that policy-wise, the Republican Party really has any intention of moving to a softer place.
Sean, I got 20 seconds.
I think I would disagree with Eric's statement. I don't think I would refer to them as anti-immigrant bills. They're anti-illegal immigration bills, and they help to enforce laws that the federal government isn't enforcing right now. So I think that's a clear distinction that needs to be made.
All right, and we'll move on to the election next segment. We'll be back with more panel debate in just a moment. But first, we'll send it over to G-Week anchor Mary Grace Brown for a GWTV news break. Mary Grace?
Thanks, Andrew. Coming up on the next episode of G-Week, President Obama introduced new executive actions aimed at reducing gun violence. We'll talk to GW students about their reactions and whether they think the new measures will work. Also, the family of a GW student who committed suicide in 2014 is suing the university, stating that the director of mental health services was unlicensed to practice as a psychologist in D.C. We'll take a closer look at that lawsuit and how GW aims to heighten their focus on mental health. And in a reversal of its previous stance, the university recently announced that it will revoke the honorary degree awarded to Bill Cosby in 1997. We'll have more details on what changed President Knapp's mind, why this decision matters to students. Tune into G-Week on Friday, January 29th, right here on GWTV, for all of these stories and more.
Wonderful academic institution with a fine athletic tradition.
Patricio Garino throws it down with two hands.
Wonderful city. It's a great place to go to school.
Keaton Savage open down the right side. Will go and Duncan with his right hand.
Not just a family, it's a whole community.
Armwood Duncan with 1.9 seconds left. Armwood, a thunder slam. 81-80 George Washington. A huge victory for the Colonials.
The George Washington University, at the intersection of policy, practice, and research, connecting all that Washington has to offer with an intellectual environment that drives progress, transforming vision into action, offering learning experiences that are rigorous, real-time, and real-world. In a city shaping the future, George Washington is a place where faculty and students don't just study the world, they work to change it.
Welcome back. The Republican presidential candidates took the stage Thursday night for the 6th time this cycle, while on the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders is surging in Iowa and New Hampshire, just 2 weeks from caucus day in the Hawkeye State. At the Fox Business debate, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz sparred over Cruz's Canadian birth. What was thought to be a settled issue was suddenly reignited when Trump said the Democrats would sue over Cruz's eligibility if the Texas senator becomes the GOP nominee.
if for some reason, Neil, he beats the rest of the field, I already know the Democrats are going to be bringing a suit. You have a big lawsuit over your head while you're running, and if you become the nominee, who the hell knows if you can even serve in office?
So, Eric, if Ted Cruz wins the Republican nomination, will you and other Democrats, like Trump says, make an issue out of Cruz's eligibility?
Well, I wouldn't, and I certainly would hope that national Democrats wouldn't either. I think this is a non-issue. Senator Cruz's mother was born in Wilmington, Delaware. She was an American citizen. That should settle the issue. And that I think distracting issues like this are an electoral loser for the party that employs them. And furthermore, I would be thrilled if Ted Cruz was the Republican nominee for president. I think that's an outcome that me and other Democrats should be hoping for. So,
Sean, what's your stance on the birther issue?
It's one of those things where I agree with Eric. We are in a 16th century monarchy. We're not looking to see who has the divine right of kings. I think we're focusing on the wrong issues, and a lot of the GOP debates have been about personalities and not issues. And I think that's a real problem. And I think Mr. Trump and Mr. Cruz both contribute to that because they're both focusing on personalities and not issues.
Well, I think that's settled then. Moving on, Eric, as a Democrat looking into the debate, what did you think of how it went?
I think that the really interesting part was seeing Ted Cruz and Donald Trump finally start to go after each other. They really are competing over the same block of voters, so to speak, a rather large block of voters, but they had really seemed very cozy allies for much of the primary season so far, and I think we're finally really starting to see that splinter now that they're neck and neck at the top of the polls, both nationally and in places like Iowa.
Sean, Senator Rubio said at the debate that if President Obama could confiscate every gun in America, he would. Do you buy that?
No, I do not buy that statement.
And Ted Cruz agreed with him.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be one of those things where they're trying to stir up the base and they're trying to play the game of, who, in the same way that Bernie Sanders is trying to play the game of who can, give everybody something for free, they're trying to play the game of how bad can we make the Democrats look.
And notably absent from the debate was Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, the libertarian voice in the Republican Party. Eric, do you think a valuable voice was missing from that stage? We even heard chants at one point of "We want Rand" during the debate.
Not particularly. I think Rand Paul's brand has been oversold a little bit. In my opinion, he's really not that different from the rest of the Republican primary field. Well, he is a welcome reprieve from some of the more hawkish voices in the room, and his stance on the drug war certainly makes a Democrat like me happy. I think that his overall differences with the rest of the Republican primary field have definitely been oversold.
Sean, should Senator Paul have been on the stage?
It's one of those things where I think he's overstayed his welcome. He hasn't run an efficient campaign, speaking as someone who knows people on that campaign, and he's been one of those people where he's ridden on his father's coattails for most of his career, and I think he tries to oversell how libertarian he is, and I think it's going to be interesting to see when he drops out.
And Mr. Trump, the frontrunner, kind of doubled down on his proposal to ban Muslims from entering the United States. He received considerable pushback from Jeb Bush, who said, "Donald, I hope you reconsider." Sean, is this an issue you hope is going away, or do you think is it going to last through the general election for the Republicans?
I think this nation was built by immigrants and for immigrants. Speaking as someone who on one side of the family goes back to the Mayflower and the other side of the family, we've only been here for 100 years. I think, Mr. Trump and other candidates on the stage forget where they came from. For me, it's a personally troubling issue when I know that there are millions of people that want to be here, that want to work, that want to be part of America. And you have millions of small success stories of people who may not have come here legally. There are millions of people in America today where their ancestors are Irish or Italian or whatever, may not have come in here legally when they came here.
And I want to pivot to the Democrats real quick. Eric, as I mentioned in the open, Bernie Sanders is surging in Iowa and New Hampshire. Is this happening at just the right time for him? And is it enough, you think, to overtake Secretary Clinton for the Democratic nomination?
I think it is happening at the right time for him, but no, outside of Iowa and New Hampshire, I think he's going to have a lot of trouble when it comes to comes to his appeal among non-white voters who make up the lion's share of the Democratic base in places like the South. Secretary Clinton beat Senator Sanders by, in some states, a 40 or 50 point margin.
Sean, I'm sorry to interrupt. Sean, do you think that Bernie Sanders' candidacy has I guess, helped engage more people, helped the debate on the Democratic side? Do you think there are any positives to his candidacy, although you might disagree with him on virtually every issue?
He's one of those people where he's like Ron Paul. He's very educated on what he stands for. He knows it through and through. I think he's struck a chord with the American public in the same way that Donald Trump has struck a chord with numerous people on the other side. I do think he's done something for this election that we did not foresee. He's giving Hillary a run for her money and also making sure that she talks about other issues. And I'm also surprised at how Hillary dismissed him in the beginning. So.
And I want to move on now, finally, some predictions for you guys. Who's going to win the nominations? Who are they going to pick to be their vice presidents? And who will win it all? Eric, we'll start with you.
I'm going to go with Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination, and I think she will pick Julian Castro as her vice president. And I think the Republican nomination is really anybody's guess at this point, but if I had to put my money on somebody, it would be Ted Cruz. And I actually could honestly see Governor Haley as the VP pick, but it would also require Cruz ceding some ideological ground.
Who wins it all?
Hillary Clinton.
Sean?
I'm going to say Hillary Clinton. I think she'll go with Bernie.
You think so?
I think that's going to happen.
Interesting.
They have some deep-seated disagreements, but I think that could be a potentially deadly ticket for the Republicans. And then on the Republican side, I think it's either going to be Cruz or Rubio. My money's with Rubio at this point. I think Cruz is going to have a period where he finally, peters out a little bit. I don't think Trump will get it. And then for a VP pick, I mean, it's up in the air. You could have Nikki Haley. You could have Governor Martinez from New Mexico. So I think that's up in the air.
And who wins it all?
I would have to say Republicans probably going to win. It's very hard to win same party right after 8 years. So.
All right, we got 11 months left. We'll see what happens. After this break, it's rapid fire. Stay with us.
Nearly 16 million people visit Washington, D.C. every year. Some come to witness, some to be heard. We come to make an impact, to learn from leaders, and to lead others. To create and create change. We are the George Washington University. We come to make history.
I believe. I believe that. I believe that we. I believe that we will win.
Welcome back. Our panel joins us again for rapid fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. An armed militia has been illegally occupying a federal wildlife refuge facility in Oregon for almost 2 weeks. Its members, however, claim 2 ranchers were unfairly jailed for setting fire to federal land. Sean, do you sympathize with the militia members?
I don't sympathize with the militia members. I do sympathize with the 2 ranchers. There's been a history of federal overreach in that region when it comes to grabbing up land for parks or for wildlife refuges, and they've also been taking away grazing rights over the years, and you're taking away a lifestyle essentially that is built the frontier out there.
Eric?
I don't sympathize with the occupiers either, and I think it also raises a number of important questions about if, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement was occupying a federal building, would they be being treated with the same courtesy and deference that the feds are currently giving the protesters in Oregon?
All right, and Rolling Stone magazine shocked the journalistic world, and for that matter, the entire world, when it published an article by actor Sean Penn that included an interview with Mexican drug lord Joaquin Guzman. otherwise known as El Chapo, following the fugitive's capture after escaping from a Mexican prison last year. Eric, was it journalistically ethical for Rolling Stone to not only publish this story, but also to give El Chapo final say over the story's contents?
Well, no. I think a number of journalistic ethics experts have widely panned this interview. But I think what's more profoundly unethical is the U.S. drug war that gives drug lords like El Chapo so much power and has ruined lives and decimated communities across the United States. And I think that if this high-profile interview can maybe wake more of our politicians up to this reality, then maybe we will have turned a problem into something good.
Sean?
I think it's unethical. I do disagree with Eric. You can't turn it into an issue about the drug war. I think it's one of those things where he's an individual who has clearly built an empire of doing wrong. And to say that that empire is built due to the United States attempting to combat drug issues in our own country and attempting to stop the flow of drugs into the country, what do you want them to do otherwise? Continue to ruin lives?
The drug war is an issue for a whole nother time, but finally, a more lighthearted topic. The NFL playoffs are well underway, and sadly, my Philadelphia Eagles are not a part of it. Sean, who's your Super Bowl pick and why?
I don't watch football.
You're being honest. It's okay. You have a choice or no?
Well, the Patriots were my choice. So,
well, you're from New England, so. Yeah. Okay, that's an easy choice. Eric?
Well, my sleeper pick was the Minnesota Vikings, and we saw how well that went last weekend. Right now, I'd have to go with the Carolina Panthers, though if your Patriots do win it as a lifelong Giants fan, I'll still condescend to you.
And with that, we end our debate here on Colonial Crossfire. Thank you to Eric Wolfert and Sean Kumnick for joining us. South Korea and its neighbors to the north are again engaged in a war of words and potential military actions after North Korea claimed to have tested a hydrogen bomb earlier this month. But the United States and other nations have cast serious doubt on the claim that North Korea has fully developed its nuclear arsenal. The DPRK, meanwhile, says the H-bomb test was meant to counter the U.S.'s, quote, hostile policy toward North Korea. In response, South Korea has restarted anti-DPRK propaganda recordings that are being blasted across the demilitarized zone. While the United Nations Security Council is currently weighing increased sanctions, all eyes are on China, a significant North Korean ally on the Security Council. Earlier, I spoke with GW professor Balbina Huang about renewed tensions with the rogue nation. Dr. Huang, thanks so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So why did North Korea do this? Why did they carry out a nuclear test?
Well, it's actually North Korea's fourth nuclear test. It's very clear that North Korea is intending to develop a wide and diversified nuclear weapons program. It's been very clear for a long time, but this fourth test, I believe, shows this, especially because North Korea claims it's a hydrogen bomb.
Do you take the country at its word when they say it's an H-bomb?
Well, no, I don't know. I will leave that to the scientists, and we may never be able to verify. What's more important than whether we take North Korea's word is that North Korea wants everyone to think that it is or has the capability to acquire an H-bomb technology. That's what's important.
Do you think that the DPRK actually has the capability, though, to strike the U.S. mainland with some type of nuclear bomb?
Well, no. Now, most scientists do not believe that North Korea has been able to miniaturize a nuclear weapon. In other words, unless you can miniaturize it and put it on a long-range missile, it is not deliverable. And that technology is actually very difficult to produce on its own. So no one believes it has it, but it's clearly striving to achieve it.
Some experts have raised concerns not necessarily about the power of the bomb itself, but rather the ability to use submarine-launched ballistic missiles to retaliate against an attack on North Korea. Do you view that as a logical concern?
Well, two things. I don't think those two things are not necessarily related. In other words, the power of nuclear weapons is not in their usage. It's actually in having them. That is the point of nuclear deterrence and a nuclear balance. Remember, the world, has only seen two actual uses of nuclear bombs, and that was to end World War II. And despite the fact that there are numerous nuclear weapons countries, never has a nuclear weapon been used since then. So that's one issue. Now, the other issue is the submarine-launched base ballistic missile technology. That actually is far more worrying to me than even the H-bomb or another nuclear test. It's actually very, very crucial and critical and worrying because it alters the balance of nuclear weapons. And that's very large problem.
What has been China's incentive to keep sort of propping up the North Korean government over the years?
Well, I'm one of those experts that does not believe that China is the key to solving this problem, because I think 15 years has shown that China absolutely will not. And the reason is very simple. It actually has very little to do with any sort of intrinsic value of the Korean Peninsula. It's purely strategic. And keeping the North Korean regime going in some form or state is absolutely in China's overall strategic interests. And that will never change, and it has not changed for hundreds of years.
So under what circumstances, then, do you think China would agree to new increasing sanctions against North Korea?
Well, increasing sanctions is a little bit different, because I think China does feel the pressure, and it may tweak the sanctions. That's really not the point. I don't think that is enough to cause the collapse of the North Korean regime, nor to change its behavior. Increasing sanctions alone is not the issue, because China can increase sanctions on certain areas, but then proceed to give North Korea even greater economic assistance. So we have to be very careful when we make these calculations.
So then do you believe the new sanctions would not work if they were to pass the Security Council?
Well, no, here's the issue with sanctions. I think it purely depends on what it is you're trying to achieve. I think this entire debate about sanctions work, they don't work, that debate is not correct, because no one says exactly or defines what the goals of the sanctions are. You have to define what they are, and then I'll tell you whether or not they'll work or not.
What do you think works better, the six-party talks or inter-Korean dialogue without a foreign intervention?
Well, no, again, I think those two issues are not a binary choice. They're really two different issues. And six-party talks or this is actually also not the choice. I do not think the six-party talks is working. I do see some merit in the principles. It has not even met since 2009. That's one issue. The nuclear issue is also another issue. But inter-Korean dialogue is completely separate, and the South Korean government has even declared that it's separate from the nuclear issue.
And finally, how has the Obama administration, in your view, constructively helped or hurt the situation with North Korea?
Well, the situation with North Korea is so broad,
right,
and it's not clear to me exactly what people mean by that. When we mean stopping North Korea's nuclear program, we've clearly not succeeded. On the other hand, have we made the problem worse? Well, North Korea's tested 2 more weapons during this administration. I can't blame the Obama administration for something that North Korea acts upon. Well, I don't necessarily say they've been doing the right thing and the credit, but they've also avoided a lot of other really catastrophic outcomes. So on balance, I'm not that critical.
All right, and we'll have to see, of course, what happens at the UN. Dr. Huang, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
My thanks to Dr. Huang. When we come back, Casey Decker has our debate fact check.
It's been pretty busy around here with parcel and flex plans going on sale, so we need an extra pair of hands around the office.
Let's go, G-Dub! Let's go, G-Dub!
We had no idea you were bringing the Colonial Army.
Whoosh! G-Dub! G-Dub!
Hey, George, I think you have an update for Firefox. Never mind.
It's on us.
To stand up to those who tell us it's not our business.
To tell our friends if what they're doing is wrong. It's on us.
To do something, anything, to keep an assault from happening.
To be more than a bystander.
To create an environment where women feel and are safe.
It's on us.
To change the way we talk about women.
To be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
It's on us.
To say something when our friends are being stupid.
To hold our friends accountable for their actions.
It's on us.
To look out for someone who's had too much to drink.
To step in if a friend is doing something that could lead to sexual assault.
It's on us.
To not give our friends a pass.
To never blame the victim.
To stop a sexual assault any way we can.
I am a member of the George Washington University community, and it's on us to end sexual violence.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact-checkers monitored our debate. Casey Decker is here to fill us in on what we missed. Casey?
Thanks, Andrew. Well, first we'll look at our liberal debater, Eric. He said that the Republican Party is rapidly losing the support of minorities, such as Hispanics, Asians, and Muslims. Those groups do largely identify as Democrats, but data shows the percentage identifying as Republicans has stayed roughly the same over the last 10 years. Eric also brought up the voting record of South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. In doing so, he said she served in the South Carolina State Senate. She actually served in the State House of Representatives. As for our Republican debater Sean, he made reference to a Senate bill number 1060 when discussing gun control laws in Connecticut. No bill by that number deals with gun control. The bill he meant to refer to was SB 1160. That's all we have for the fact check. Andrew?
Thanks so much, Casey. And now for Spilled Milk. Here's our tribute to the very best of late-night political comedy.
Today, my love has gone away. The bottle stands so long, the symbol of the dawn.
The legend of Bernie Sanders. You see, Sanders was born in Brooklyn in 1941 and raised by his parents, a Che Guevara poster and a scratchy wool sweater.
Tonight I'm announcing a new national effort to get it done.
Cancer? You've got 11 months left. Oh my God, it's been 8 years and you couldn't get Guantanamo done. Now you're gonna get cancer done in 11 months?
Thank you, Republicans and mustard, for being the only things that come in mild, spicy, brown, and yellow.
Now, if you've been following the news lately, you know it's an incredibly hard time for white people. Everything has gluten. Mad Men ended. And there are 7-year-old children in this country who have never even known a white president.
The networks did something I'd never seen before. They sold ad time during his pauses.
We the people.
DraftKings, daily fantasy sports jackpots. Play free with promo code State of the Union.
Our Constitution begins with those 3 simple words.
Hotel Transylvania 2, now available on Blu-ray.
All right, well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire. For all the latest updates from our political team at any time, be sure to follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. For all of us here at GWTV, I'm Andrew Desiderio. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you right back here next time.